I hereby call to order the Riverside Planning and Zoning Commission regular meeting for Wednesday, August 23rd, 2023. And could you please call the roll?
Sure. Commissioner Pelletier?
Here.
Commissioner Marhol?
Here.
Commissioner Miller?
Here.
Commissioner Lang?
Here.
Commissioner Braun?
Here.
And Chairperson Henaghan.
Here. We have a quorum. Our first item is the approval of minutes, the regular meeting minutes for July 26, 2023. Is there a motion to approve?
I move to approve the minutes.
Second.
Does anyone have any changes to the minutes? Hearing none, and please call the roll.
Commissioner Pelletier?
Aye.
Commissioner Marhol?
Aye.
Commissioner Miller?
Aye.
Commissioner Lang?
Aye.
Commissioner Braun?
Aye.
Chairperson Henaghan.
Aye. The motion was approved. Is there anyone present who would like to speak during this time about an item that is not on the agenda? All right. It takes us to our village board update. Ann, do you have an update for us?
I actually do not have an update.
Okay, all right. Moving right along. Our first item of new business is the discussion regarding temporary sign standards, which starts on page 7 in the electronic packet. Ann, take it away.
Thank you. The village board asked for your input on temporary signs for businesses and whether there can be additional flexibility in the code. The signs that move are prohibited in all districts in the village. The village's sign code limits temporary signs in the B2 district, which is the downtown area, to one of 3 types, which are outlined in the memo to the board, which is on page 8 in your packet. So the 3 types of temporary signs that are allowed in the B2 district are sandwich boards, window signs, and event signs, which are typically banners, so you'd have that for a special event. And as a reminder, the commission reviewed sign standards for the TOD-related code amendments excuse me, in February and August of 2022. The commission gave considerable thought and input regarding signage, but the meeting minutes don't indicate that there was specifically a discussion on movable flags or temporary signage during that time. And those of you who were serving during that time, please correct me if I missed something. So in any case, the commission approved the new sign standards, which included the existing prohibition on movable signs. And in considering some flexibility for the sign standards, one example is Gears to You. Mr. Janunas, who's here with us tonight, owns Gears to You and was using feather flags, which are tall vertical flags that move in the wind. He said that the flags help customers find his business. And Mr. Janunas said that he'd like to use his flags during the peak season, which would be Memorial Day or Labor Day, while his store is open. His operating hours range from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., depending on the day. I would note that, excuse me, Gears to You can add permanent signs to their storefront, and Mr. Janunas said he would review his options for permanent signs after discussing them with staff. And that was outlined in the memo, and if you have any questions about what was in the memo, I'd be happy to cover that for you. But we're looking for feedback to give to the village board on temporary signs for businesses and whether there can be additional flexibility in the code. The Economic Development Commission will be also weighing in on this during their September 13th meeting, and those results will go to the village board for potential further action.
So when I was reviewing the different temporary sign pieces, what seemed like a similar parallel to me were the sandwich boards. Granted, there's 2 in front of Gears to You, but I feel like that's a pretty similar ask in terms of having something in front of the business.
I kind of wonder what it was we were trying to prevent by not allowing movable signs. And I feel like maybe the delineation is between kind of naturally or passively moving versus motorized or having some mechanism that causes them to move. I think we probably were thinking of those, right?
Sure.
Blow up kind of signs.
Sure, the dancing man.
Yeah, the
Sure.
dancing man, thank you. Yeah.
There was, I want to speculate, and say there was also, I know there was something against LED moving signs as well, so that might have reflected into that concept of movement.
I have seen.
I noticed in the code too, I mean, because I thought, well, a good solution could be having a banner that could be strong, that would be fairly solid, you know, tight. But I see the code doesn't allow that either. That's only allowed for temporary things, and those really aren't flapping around in the wind or anything like that. So I think there's two issues. One is the movable signs and the type, better defining what they are. And another thing is for a short-term business, like yours to you, or a pop-up or something like that, should the code have a different allowance for signs for those kinds of businesses? I don't know the answer.
I have seen in different sign codes, some provisions for movement by air, as Commissioner Pelletier noted, versus movement by motor. That would eliminate things like bubble machines from being used, which are sometimes used for signs. But if there is a desire by the commission to provide some direction to the village board that flags that move would be desirable, number, size, and any other standards that the commission would be interested in having as a standard is something that I'd like to report.
My concern with flags or the feather banners, I would want to have some sort of restriction on wear. It seems like those type of flags might present more wear or some shredding, and certainly I wouldn't want, I would want those, if we do allow those type of flags, those type of movable by air signs, I would want the responsibility to be on the business owner to make sure that those flags or banners are in good shape and not tattered.
This may need to only be a rhetorical question, but in the memo, there's mention that an acceptable sign, village code would allow a hanging sign suspended between two of the columns. That's okay. I'm trying to figure out in my mind how that's different from a banner.
Sure.
Unless and I'm gonna speculate and then you can shoot me down. Are we talking about if it's hanging, then it's a solid thing rather than cloth or flexible? Is that where the difference comes to possibly in staff's mind?
Sure. It's a difference of material. So banner would be something, coated cloth, whereas the sign that I was envisioning, and I discussed with Mr. Janunas about a permanent sign, would be signboard or wood with raised letters and permanently affixed in some way, and ideally hung from the roof of the train station and kind of center between two columns.
Okay,
if that makes
so
sense.
You're confirming what I just said, which is solid
Yes.
versus flexible.
Sure.
cloth.
And based on the number, based on the location, so the sign code allows two primary signs for a corner property. I think this is more actually three-sided, but a corner-ish property. And taking a look at that and the structure of the building and the fact that it has architectural features that can't be covered by a sign, I think the best solution is a sign over the door, and then possibly either a blade sign attached to the column. And you've seen those down on, I think it's Quincy has a few stores with those blade signs. Or alternately, if it makes sense in terms of size and mounting, to put what I would call a hanging sign mounted in between, centered between the two columns, so that folks on Blooming Bank can see the entrance to the business. And all of those would be permissible by the code without changing the code as is.
I think as you describe it, and from what I looked at in the code, there are a lot of options for signs. And the fact that we don't allow movable signs or feather signs or whatever, maybe that we need to change that. But I think there are a lot of options for signs unless someone came to us having like a temporary or short-term business and said, it's not economical for me to have a sign that costs whatever one of these signs would cost to make for a short-term business, and so I need a variance. I think that's how I'm kind of thinking about it. Because I think the code is fairly flexible in the kind of signs. I don't understand why, like a banner like they put up in Guthrie Park couldn't be allowed for a temporary business. I can see why you wouldn't want it for a permanent business, because it's going to start showing wear, it's going to fray, it's going to sag, it's all the rest. So that makes sense to me. But if it's a temporary business, maybe something that is less expensive, still relatively attractive, would be fine. And then I'm not sure about, when I look at the feather signs, I haven't been there when it's been super windy, but they basically look fairly stable to me. And if there was a similar sign that was just like solid and it was sitting there in the same size, I would think it would be serving the same purpose. Although I'm not sure if that's allowed under our code. I don't know if that's a pylon sign or if that sign, because a pylon sign is supposedly attached to the ground.
That's the difference. So you've got your freestanding, permanently mounted to the ground signs. You've got sandwich boards, which I think you don't want to go too much taller than what we allow, because at that point, if the wind does catch it or it falls over, it has the opportunity of damaging someone or a vehicle. In terms of temporary signs for businesses, you could have a banner as a special event for, the code is not entirely crystal clear about when you would have a special event for a business that would require that type of sign. So very clearly, like the farmer's market, that's a special event. You can have banners to advertise your business. For an individual business, I think we would tie that to the town special event application. So you could submit, if you were having, I'm trying to think of an example, and one's escaping me. But in any case, if you wanted to have a banner, that would be allowed under the provision of the code. And I believe without being able to find it immediately, there is a provision in the code for temporary signs when people are starting a business. I believe you can have a temporary sign just before getting a permanent sign, and then if you can't use that as an option, Gears to You has a couple of window signs up that are right now, which is, you wouldn't necessarily even have to have a vinyl on glass sign like they have. You could just make a sign, set it in your window as a temporary basis until you have your permanent sign, if it was an issue of flexibility or installation.
To clarify on the feather signs, they're relatively light, could be taken. I want to clarify some of my comments on the sandwich board in that they could be taken down when not open for a business, or okay.
I think they're meant to be taken inside at night.
Yeah.
And many codes will say something like, I believe, without looking at our sandwich board requirement, is that you take the sandwich board sign in at night. That's pretty standard for a sign code requirement.
I'll just add, I don't have any issue with the specific signs that Gears to You has, particularly if they're brought in when the business isn't open. There's nothing electronic involved, there's no motors. I think those would all be requirements that I would want to see, because I know that while these signs seem fine, other businesses can be very creative in the way they use attention-getting devices in ways that can be extremely unattractive and something that we wouldn't want to see. Mm-hmm. So I would want to make sure that we think about other possibilities when we come up with this language as well, because I mean these two feather signs I think are fine in my personal opinion, but I know I'm just trying to think of kind of the worst case, what someone could do that we might not want to see.
I agree. We have to be careful that we don't want a slippery slope.
Any other thoughts?
Would there be any consensus on the number of, if the commission were to make a recommendation to the village board, the number of feather flags, if those were a sign that you'd want to permit? Or another option would be pole-mounted flag. If you think of the standard American flag, pole-mounted to the side of the building, that's another option you could think of. So it's off the ground.
Can it be based on store area so that you wouldn't have, a small store wouldn't have 6 feather flags in front of it, but one that was larger could space them out appropriately to a certain extent. I'd still want to cap it, but I don't have a number in
Sure.
mind.
You could have one per street front, you could have one per frontage along the street if you wanted. I, just thinking of those who might have a better understanding or better mental map in their head of this size of storefronts along some of the commercial areas. I can't think of any storefronts that are so long that you wouldn't see both flags at once, pretty close to each other, if you had more than one.
I'm not even sure I want to go that direction just because I think about some of the structures on Quincy, and there's many different businesses that are served by the same doorway.
Sure,
So
sure.
where do you draw that line? And to avoid the slippery slope issue, for purposes of discussion, I would say 2 signs and no more, and in total area, no more than 4 by 6 feet, which matches the sandwich board restriction or condition, which means if you want 2 signs that are 2 foot by 6 foot, that meets that 24, sorry, I'm thinking out loud. 2 signs, no more than total of 24 square feet is where I'd start.
Each of them or total?
Total.
But you
2
can have
signs.
sandwich boards. I believe you can have 2 sandwich boards.
It actually says one sandwich board per storefront,
Okay.
but for the purposes of when we're talking about feather signs, I would say that gives you 2 signs, gives you 1 on either side of the door. The 24 square feet is derived from the sandwich board, so that theoretically comes from some good thoughts there.
Does our current code have any limitations on the number of signs an office or a business can have?
Yes, and it's based on, for the B2 district, I'll pull up the sign controls area. There is a table that describes primary signs and secondary signs. So for your primary sign, you're going to have 1 wall sign per business or 1 monument and pylon sign. So you have the option of a wall sign or monument pylon sign. If you are a corner property, you can have 2. And then there are limitations on the size of those signs. You can have a window or an awning or canopy sign, and there are restrictions there. And then you can have a directory wall sign. And then they break it down secondary signs, window or awning and canopy, and then an additional sign, a blade sign, one of those that sticks out like a little flag, non-moving flag from the, yeah.
So are we discussing now additional signs in addition to the primary and secondary signs that are allowable?
So there are 3 types of temporary signs that are allowed. I think the intention of the village board was to consider whether to expand that into additional temporary signage that's available, particularly in the B2 district, with the example being, Gears to You and the feather flags that they use, but I think open to other possibilities.
I think the 2 temporary signs per frontage maybe is reasonable. I think the 24 feet total for this type of sign may be not quite sufficient to be effective. Just looking at the photograph of Gears to You, if you look at that sandwich board and compare it to the feather flags, seems to be a greater area for the feather flags, and yet they seem reasonable in size.
I just looked up, just for comparison's sake, a feather flag on a website where you can have them custom made. And the dimensions that they're providing, just for the flag, not for the stand, so the stand would give a little additional height, is 68 inches, which I believe is, 5 feet 8 inches? And then with the stand, it's probably 6 feet total. And then the width of that is a little less than 2 feet. It's 21 inches.
Oh.
And so I calculated that as 11, a little over 11
Yeah.
square feet.
That would be actually what you were proposing, 6 by 2. Perhaps we could ask what size the flags are, if you know.
The 10 feet. So, but the thing is, it's not square.
Mm-hmm.
So it goes like this. It's
Sure.
it's not going to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, what you're saying.
Yeah, they helpfully calculated that for me on the website, but yeah, it's a
They came in different- two different
leaf shape.
sizes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's like
I was using the 24 square feet as a point of discussion, so I think that can be adjusted based on what is reasonably purchasable by an owner. And I'm not interested in forcing anyone into going to something custom. So if, that's 10 foot by 2 feet minus something, the signs that are in the photo are, in my mind, as two of my other compatriots here have already said, seem fairly reasonable. And the fact that they have to come inside at the end of the day does tend to make it so that they will be a reasonable size, because no one's gonna wanna deal with that. So I think some of the restrictions we already have, in a lot of ways, force some reasonableness. Now, I also understand that people can get awfully creative, and all of a sudden we have a flagpole and something that sticks up 30 feet, and we want to avoid that as well, so.
I'm unclear if what we're discussing as a commission right now is these kinds of feather signs only for temporary businesses, which would then be defined by some period of time, or if my fellow commissioners are thinking we could allow these in any business whenever wanted in Riverside. I'm not clear.
I think it's for temporary signage for all businesses.
Well, in that case, I think if, we'd also have to consider things like right-of-way, public sidewalk, all that kind of stuff. Here, this is a unique situation. It's historic, on the one hand, it's a historic building. I'm sure the Preservation Commission will have something to say about that. But on the other hand, there's a lot of room at this location, so it can be out of the way of a sidewalk. But if you were to put that up on, say, Burlington or Harlem sidewalk or something like that, it could really impede pedestrians, et cetera.
I think we could require that they preserve an ADA accessible path, which I think is probably in the code.
It is
Right,
for
so
sandwich
that
boards.
would limit them to some
Yeah.
extent on public sidewalks.
I don't even think that's a negotiable.
Right,
That's,
yeah.
they have to
It's
abide by
understood.
ADA code
But are you on a public sidewalk?
anywhere.
The business that fronts the public sidewalk is required to allow for whatever width that is. Is it 10 feet or 12 feet?
Yeah,
four.
otherwise, they're gonna be.
It's 4 feet?
It is, it's 4 feet, an ADA accessible path.
So
One
I'm
way is
thinking 4
considered
feet is not, I would personally think 4 feet is not sufficient. We were just talking about the path, weren't we? Not just, but the path in Swan Pond, and people were arguing about, 8 feet or 10 feet or something like that. So I would think where we have sidewalk widths that are that wide in our downtown area, or even on Harlem, we'd want to maintain that without obstruction, just for ease of movement, and that's my opinion.
So the code currently states that for sandwich boards, the sign shall not interfere with any pedestrian area or block necessary sight lines for pedestrians or vehicles. Under no circumstances shall the sign reduce the open portion of public and private sidewalks to less than 5 feet, clear of all obstructions. That could give some benefit to areas of the village where there is not 5 feet clear on the sidewalk, to allow perhaps a flagpole mounted to the building as an alternative to a freestanding sign that's weighted in the public way.
Is there a limitation in the code as to how many temporary signs a business can have at any one time?
There is, for the sandwich board, it is one per
that's
business.
one.
And then window signs is based on the size of the sign, to the size of the window sign and the number for the coverage. And then event signs is, open for special events.
But could you potentially, can a business have potentially one sandwich board, 2 feather flags, one window sign? Could they have multiple temporary signs?
As of now, the temporary signs, window signs are considered, I think if it's temporary, it'd be literally a sign up in the window and then a sandwich board, and you can have both of those at the same time. You can also have a sandwich board and all of your permanent signs at the same time.
So what are people thinking about what the word temporary means?
Yeah. It's a good question.
Is it seasonal? Is it number of days, or is it just simply hours that the business is open, or?
At least for sandwich boards and I believe the feather signs, to me, well, the way I interpret the temporary is that it isn't permanently standing there, that it must be taken in at night
And
or
that's
when the
what,
business is closed.
that's what makes it temporary, is that it can be removed to the interior.
Yes.
If we can jump back really quick to the size of the signs, would it be possible to find out the exact dimensions of the signs that are at Gears to You and sort of use that as the starting point for size regulations, since we seem to be in agreement that those are appropriate,
Okay.
rather than guessing at what they are?
Sure.
Could I ask Mr. Janunis a question? Does he have to go to the podium? Sure. Just wondering, when you chose these particular signs, why did you choose them as opposed to like a flag hanging from a flagpole or anything else?
Mr. Janus, would you mind using the microphone, please? Thank you. Appreciate
Like
it.
sort of as a business owner, what appealed to you?
Mostly because of the temporary, that I could take them in at night. The flagpole wasn't really an option because it's a historic building, and I can't drill into it or anything like that. So that's why we wanted something that we could take in at night that wouldn't be crazy and intrusive. So that's why.
And the feather signs, I assume, are also fairly light.
They are, and they're also the way we designed them is to help us. You could customize them, so they're customized. One side says sales, the other side says service. Says service and rentals. And part of my agreement with the village having a spot is I have to have rentals, and so we had no other way to really provide that, to advertise that. I mean, we have the bikes out there, but most of the time people just think I'm selling those bikes. I mean, daily I get it. So we wanted it to go that way.
Thank you.
And just to clarify, and I'm certainly not the expert, but in a few discussions that we've had with the Preservation Commission approving new signs on the water tower building, the direction that I've heard from the Preservation Commission, and actually there's another sign that's going to be installed on the train depot building. It's for Metra. There's a ticket sign that they want to have installed. And the kind of what I've heard was, if you install the sign, you can install it, and you can make a change to the building as long as you drill into the mortar, not the stone or brick that's on the building. So that's how the Metra sign, that was a condition of approval for the Metra sign. That was the condition of approval for the new canopies at the water tower building, where, as long as you can install them by drilling into that mortar, you can install a permanent installation. So I think that's why I felt very confident that we could have some permanent signage there for Gears to You.
What more direction can we provide you, Dan?
Is there, well, I guess I would ask, is there consensus on allowing is there a direction or preference of a feather flag or a flag that's attached to a building from the commission?
I would say I probably prefer the feather flags because they are temporary and they come in at night. So
I
But a
would,
flagpole.
A flagpole could be two, but,
But it's not temporary. I mean, the flagpole is not temporary.
yeah, flagpole's not temporary.
Take them out of the stands? No? I mean, look, one of those, that like people have on front of their house that goes into a stand that's drilled.
Oh,
inside
and then
the
you
house.
bring
That's what I'm thinking
Yeah,
of.
Right.
I
Yeah,
apologize,
right.
that's what I meant. A bracket with the pole where you can stick the flag in.
I
That's
think
what I
they
was
serve
thinking
sort of
anyway.
two different needs for different locations.
Could be.
I can see in feathers being appropriate for some place where you have more sidewalk space. If you don't have more sidewalk space, maybe the flag might be a more practical way to go. I'd honestly be okay with mixing and matching them if we say you can have two signs or whatever we come up with.
When I'll correct myself. When I heard flagpole, I was thinking literally a 10-foot tall flagpole
With
that
the
is
flag.
stuck to the building and not a standard, the
Right.
American flag stuck to.
That's,
And what
And-
I was thinking was sort of a cheap alternative to a blade sign that can be taken in and out. Although going that route, there might be more issues with size, maybe a size of 4x6 would be too, for a pedestrian street would be too large, so that would have to be looked at, I guess.
so would the general consensus be using the standard that we have in the code that under no circumstances shall a temporary sign reduce the open portion of the public-private sidewalks to less than 5 feet clearance? That would give the opportunity for businesses that have that clearance to use a feather flag that's on the ground. And if they don't have that opportunity, the other option could be to have a bracket on the wall with an angled flagpole that juts out and has, as long as, again, it doesn't obstruct pedestrians or anything like that, that has a flag on there. And that could be one or two, or one of each, depending on the direction of the commission. And the thought generally is if there are two allowed, the total square footage would be, let's say, 24 square feet or whatever a reasonable addition is, using Gears 2 as an example of the total square footage of those two flags together. And that if you have to put it on a historic building, you'd have to get preservation approval to put the bracket for the flagpole on there, but if you're doing a feather flag, no. And then open during business hours and taken in at night.
Yeah.
I would have a restriction that it can't obstruct vision
Yes,
at all, line of sight.
yep.
And the
Can't be
last,
a nuisance.
and the last thing I would add is just it has to be well maintained, so we don't have.
Sure.
I'm just imagining, I'm sure we have some fellow residents who have left flags out for an extended period of time and they get pretty ratty.
Sure.
So,
Okay.
And the base should be stable enough to
So that it's not a danger.
likely to keep tipping over, and I don't know what that would be, if that would be a weight limit, or,
Okay.
I don't know how
Yeah, I
you do that.
agree. It has to be secured, so it's safe, it's not blowing around.
Yes, or so it doesn't like constantly tip over, and then, it's lying on the sidewalk all the time, that kind of idea.
I would just stick with well-maintained.
Okay.
That addresses the point you've just made, because if it's
Possibly.
tipped over, it's no longer well-maintained.
Sure.
Okay.
There's no negotiation on, that's not, if it's on the ground, we're done.
Okay.
That could also fall into, it can't be a nuisance, so
Yeah.
if it's
Yeah.
always falling over, it's certainly a nuisance.
Or likely an obstruction as well, if it's on the ground.
And is there a comfort with 10 feet as the maximum height for a freestanding feather flag?
Definitely not more than that, yeah. With the base, you're saying?
Sure,
Yeah.
total height.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And then I think there was something in the sign code about things can't be sparkly, or, I don't know. I mean, you probably wouldn't want like streamers flying from it, or like, I don't know.
So one solid piece of material instead of.
Something, whatever is in the sign code, I think there was something about that somewhere about, maybe there isn't, but,
Well, there's already the prohibition about pennants and streamers. We can perhaps keep that and add this other language.
Okay, so
Yeah.
to not have the appearance of and when I think of a streamer, I think of a smaller piece of fabric, or maybe multiple, almost like a fringe. So solid piece of single material, okay.
Should we address a number limitation with regard to how many temporary signs of each type or ilk are allowed?
well, I think Commissioner Mahul's suggestion was a total of 24 square feet. So that means you
Okay.
could have one of that size, or two, or three, I suppose, but whatever.
I'd say no more than two,
No more than two, up to total of 24 square feet.
Whatever that reasonable size is determined to be.
I heard that. I was just so focused on the feather flags. I didn't think that that included the sandwich, but I could. get
Oh,
behind
no,
that.
I was more just thinking on flags, to be honest.
Okay.
Two,
I would say two in addition to a sandwich
Yeah.
board sign.
Okay.
yes.
Potential for one. For some reason, these things seem to come in pairs.
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
Do we want to say not more than so many in a lineal footage? Just because if a business, like a business has two, but your example of Quincy Street, if there's a lot of businesses in one building, it might get,
Up to two, but no more, but
Two,
not.
two per doorway.
per doorway.
And on Quincy Street, they're gonna
Yeah.
have to arm wrestle to
Right.
figure out who gets them. I don't think there's a lot
Yeah.
of businesses in town that actually share a doorway, so.
yeah, makes sense. Two per entrance.
Two per entrance sounds good. I like that.
I like two per entrance.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Good discussion there. Our next item is old business, the discussion regarding front yard porches and decks in the Groveland, Lincoln, Kimbark area, which starts on page 11 in the PDF packets. Ann?
Thank you. Since your last meeting, staff drafted amendments with new standards for new unenclosed front porches on single and two-family properties in the R3 district. So I'll just review, and I'll try to be brief. I know there's a lot of information. We'll start with the current standards for front porches, an explanation of the draft amendments. I'll review the draft amendments, and then talk about the effect of the draft amendments on properties in the R3 district, and the proposed standards applied to example properties in the R3 district. So starting with the current standards, the takeaway from that section of the memo is that for properties with less than a 26-foot street setback, building a front porch of a usable size, 5 or 6 feet, is challenging because the buildable area then conflicts with the code's requirement that nothing can be within 20 feet of the street lot line. So taking that 26 foot as the starting point for where the code starts to conflict with building a usable porch, the proposed amendments would apply to properties, again, single and two-family dwellings in the R3 district, but with an existing street yard of less than 26 feet. So those with a street yard of 26 feet or greater can build a 6-foot deep porch on their property already without having any kind of change in the code. The proposed amendments would allow those properties to have a new unenclosed porch that encroaches more than 25% into the street yard. So currently, that's the restriction in the code. It would limit the amount of the porch encroachment in the street yard to 6 feet. So staff selected 6 feet instead of 5 as a usable size. Obviously, that can be changed if the commission desires. But the thought process was that limiting the depth of the porches to 6 feet prevents further encroachments into the street yard than necessary to build a usable front porch. And again, we're talking about street yards that are 26 feet or less. So you're already pretty close to the street yard. Allowing a 6-foot porch on a property with a 26-foot street yard would put the edge of the porch right at 20 feet. The proposed amendment would also require a minimum 12-foot separation between the street lot line and the foundation or face of the porch, and any associated stairs. And that was based on the direction from the commission during our last meeting. So to review that in the draft amendments, which I believe is on page 12, the second page of the memo, that language that I just reviewed was added to that section H, and it's actually H5, the H1 is incorrect. If the commission supports language, staff will work with the village attorney to streamline the language. It's a little bit wordy, while ensuring it applies to the appropriate properties. So this, could be reviewed by a lawyer and further refined, but basically, what I just mentioned, the conditions that I mentioned are contained in the proposed code. Moving on to the third page of the memo, the effects of the proposed amendments on properties in the R3 district. So the R3 district was selected as the target area for these amendments during the last meeting. And just for purposes of visualization, I divided it into 4 sections, and those maps are included in your packet. Sections 3 and 4 are all multifamily properties and townhomes, so those will be excluded from these considerations. So focusing on section 1 and 2, section 1 are the properties that we previously looked at during different meetings, with the addition of West Avenue. And the section 2 is a mix of single-family homes and townhomes on the north side of East Burlington Street. And those, and just as a note, I put in there that the lots for section 1 are generally 160 feet deep, and in section 2 are generally 100 feet deep. Interestingly, the lots that are a little bit shallow, those 100-foot deep lots on East Burlington, typically have a little bit of a bigger street yard than the lots that are a little bit longer, for whatever reason. But in any case, we had previously surveyed the properties in section 1, excluding those on West Avenue, to determine the number of properties that would be subject to the proposed amendment and how they'd be affected. So after the last meeting, I added properties from West Avenue and those properties on Burlington from section 2 into an analysis. And included in your packet was attachment B, which is that table. It's a survey of homes in the R3 district with street yards less than 26 feet. So narrowing down all of the properties in R3 to those in sections 1 and 2, because those are the ones that have single and 2-family homes, and then further narrowing down, eliminating properties that already have a porch. So these are properties that do not have a porch, that could reasonably add a porch to the property, and that's understandably, that's a subjective decision, but we had talked about that during the last meeting, why some properties were ruled out. And then properties that have a street yard of less than 26 feet. So narrowing all those down, we're looking at 27 such properties in the R3 district. Of those 27 properties, 19 could have a 6-foot porch without encroaching into the 12-foot street yard setback that will be proposed as part of the amendments. Of the 8 remaining properties, 1 could have a 4-foot porch. 1 could have slightly less than 4-foot porch. And 6 would just not have enough area for a usable porch. It would be less than 4 feet, down 3 feet, 2 feet, or maybe no area for porch, based on the street setback. So looking at a couple of examples of how this would be applied, we use 2 properties in the R3 district. The first is 95 Groveland Avenue, and that was the property that was subject to the variation request. And if we take a look at the materials in the packet in attachment C, it's the second to last page, it's page 21. The property at 95 Groveland has a street yard of 19.6 feet, so they're already in an area where they couldn't add anything currently to the front of the property. With the proposed standards, they could build a 6-foot porch in the 7.6-foot area between the foundation of the house and the 12-foot street setback. So starting at the street, you've got 12 feet, and then between that 12-foot setback and the foundation of the house, you've got 7.6 feet. So in that area, you've got room for a 6-foot porch. The thing to note is that there would only be, of course, 1.6 feet remaining between the porch and the 12-foot setback for stairs. Now, in the memo, I noted that the stairs could be located on either side of the porch. Based on the configuration of the house, it would be on, if you're standing on the street looking at the house, it'd be on the right-hand side of the house, because there's access to the property. And I'll go over the second property in a second, but I just wanted to note that we did receive feedback after the packet was published from the owner of 95 Groveland Avenue, Mr. Cirillo. And he wanted to give feedback. He couldn't, unfortunately, attend today's meeting, but he wanted to provide feedback, and I wanted to share that with you. Initially, I believe that when I had discussed the porch with Mr. Cirillo, the possibility of having a structure on the side of the house that connected to the porch was something that he was in favor of. And I must have misunderstood what he said. He said he is not interested in having stairs built on the south side of the porch. He says it would not look good aesthetically, but he also wasn't sure that the stairs would be to code. He didn't think there was enough room. And I'll speak more on that in just a second. The second issue is that he didn't originally have a roof structure in his designs. He would need to find a way to incorporate that into his design if he wanted to have a porch, because the commission had decided that a structure without a roof is a deck. So what makes a porch is the roof. And he notes that if he can't build the structure with the stairs coming out the front, then he would instead look at putting a front stoop and stairs on the front of his house. So currently, he had, if you look at the packet that I provided to you or left at your desk with the email, the third page of that is a photo of his house. When he was renovating the house, there were stairs exiting the front of the house, going down. There wasn't even a landing there, so the stairs were definitely not to code, and apparently they were structurally unsound. So he had removed those, and currently there's no way to access the front door of the house. And I know that so per the code, he could build to the current building code standards, so with a landing and stairs at an appropriate rise and run, a set of a stoop and stairs to exit his property. And I believe he was waiting to do that to find out if he could instead build a porch that he'd like to build. So just to draw back your attention to his first point, that he was concerned there was enough room on the property to build a set of stairs. So I was hoping to get verification prior to the meeting from the village's building plans examiner that I had calculated things correctly, and I wasn't able to get that before the meeting. But I took a look at, and you can see my calculations on the second page of the materials that were left at your desk. There are 3 measurements on this plat of survey. Starting at the top left corner of the house, at the top of the green rectangle is a measurement showing that that is a 6-foot porch on the front of the house. Running the length of the house down past where the front stairs are shown, and then turning right, and then the right turn shows the distance between the house and the driveway. And according to the plat of survey, that's about 5.9 feet. So if you ran a porch in the area where the green is located and then had a landing kind of at the corner of the house, landing should be 48 inches square, I believe. And then the stairs down would be 36 inches wide at a minimum, and then you'd leave extra room for a wall on the side. I believe there is enough room, and I calculated the run of the stairs, the distance the stairs would need to be, based on an estimated height of the deck. And if I'm calculating everything correctly, I believe you would have the stairs end before you reach the doorway on the side of the house, which you can see in the photo. And that tiny connection between the driveway and the house that's shown on the plat is the sidewalk that connects there. So I believe, unless I've made a grave error in my calculation or I completely misunderstand construction, which is definitely possible, I believe this is physically possible to put the stairs on the side and have it meet code.
I don't think you have to make any apologies for the calculations, but no matter what, the statement from the homeowner that side stairs are impossible, I can't support that, because that's making the assumption that a porch would need to width-wise extend from wall to outside wall of the house. And that is not at all true, and that's a design decision. So just,
Sure.
that's all I need to say, but that 6-foot distance, or the 5'9" distance that you measured, there's more leeway in there when we start talking about a porch that is attached to the front of the house. That's all.
Sure. In any case, and it could not be an issue of whether it is physically possible, and obviously Mr. Cirillo has an idea of what his vision for what he wants the porch to look like. So I wanted to share those thoughts with you, And, that could come up in your discussion of whether, stairs in any case can encroach within that 12-foot area, or there's some allowance for that you'd like to give. And then the second example was a property at 280 East Burlington, and so that's in our section 2 of the R3. That property is a 24.7-foot setback. That's pretty typical for that area based on the measurement, so this gives you a good idea of what the other properties would look like. Currently, they would be limited to a 4.7-foot porch, because without encroaching in that 20-foot area, with the proposed standards, they could build a 6-foot porch. In the area that they would have to build that porch is 12.7 feet. And that house is a little bit taller, I believe, than 95 Groveland. So I think that the stairs would fit, but again, if you leave some allowance for the stairs within the porch area, saying that the stairs don't start exactly at the front of the porch, then you've got some room to maneuver in there. So those are the examples that I had, and just to wrap up before you discuss the text amendments, if you support the proposed amendments, what I'd like to propose next is that we present the draft text amendment to the village board in an upcoming meeting. And if the village board supports the amendment, we would schedule a public hearing to bring this back before you and get your recommendation. And then your recommendation, along with the Preservation Commission's recommendation, will be presented to the village board as a possible text amendment.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Ann.
Thank you.
All right. Any discussion on the proposed text amendment?
I just have one question going back to the first house that was discussed.
Mm-hmm.
Are stairs required for a front porch?
For a front porch, I don't think the building, I don't know the building code well enough. I would assume that if you have an egress from your house, having usable stairs would be something that would be, if not required, highly desirable.
Understood.
But I don't know that they are a building code requirement. They're certainly not a zoning code requirement.
I would assume there's just 2 exits required off any buildings.
I assume so too. I don't know the building code well enough to speak to that. But as I said, if Mr. Cirillo wanted to build and he still decided that he might pursue that option to build a stoop, which, could be covered or uncovered, and, the minimum building requirements, I believe, for that are 48-foot, square, or inch square area, and then, steps to follow. That's permitted by the zoning code. He wouldn't need a variation or any kind of text amendment to do that.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
I fully support the text changes, and I think the amount of work you did was really terrific.
Yeah.
I particularly like the table. It very clearly shows that if we include Mr. Cirillo's property, of the 27 properties that are in this category, 18 of them have the opportunity to get relief of having a porch. And I think your example on Burlington is a really good one. It shows how, there's maybe 6 properties right there that couldn't have a porch now, but under this provision, because they would only have like a 4-foot porch, which is untenable, under this provision, with a 2-foot additional encroachment into what the circumstances are now, they could all have porches. So I think that's very reasonable, and I'm totally in favor of this. And whether 95 Groveland and its current or future owner can't find a way to make it work for him or her, I think that's unfortunate, but I think nonetheless, this text amendment is, very attractive to me.
Commissioner Miller said it well.
I agree.
I know I wasn't at the last meeting, but I did look at the minutes and I did look at the video. It's my understanding that everyone last month was in agreement that both the new unenclosed porch as well as any stairs that lead to that porch would not be any more than 12 feet from the lot line. With that in mind, perhaps when we're discussing in the text amendment how it's measured, perhaps we should say, we should add where it says additional 2 feet into the street yard, or, and this is what I added, or the front edge of the stairs, whichever is closest to the street lot line. Because we're
To
not
allow an
saying
additional
any.
2 feet of stair encroachment into that 12 feet?
No, I'm not suggesting any sort of encroachment allowance. It's just that when you're talking about how it's measured, the text amendment only indicates it's measured from the deck boards, I believe.
No,
The
there's
face of the deck boards. It
in the-
doesn't mention anything about the front edge of the stairs.
No, in that same sentence, it says, new unenclosed porch or any associated stairs be closer than 12 feet.
Right, but it's not.
And then it
saying the
says-
Point of the part of the stairs. It talks about
Oh,
the
as
baseboard
measured
of
to
the
the
foundation.
And
foundation.
then
or
it
face
says,
of the
as
deck
measured
boards.
to the
Sure.
foundation of the face of the deck boards of the
Of the
unenclosed
enclosed
porch.
porch. That should also say, and any associated stairs.
I believe so.
Yeah.
Yes.
And thank
And-
you, I'll bring that up with the village attorney and make sure that that intention is actually in the text.
So I had a note on that. My recommendation was in the line that ends, may a new unenclosed porch, I would say, or may any point of a new unenclosed porch or the associated stairs or stoop, so any point.
Any point.
Because sometimes
Sure.
you don't have something square on. It's like, the houses are an angle compared to the street lot line. So I think that that's
Sure.
consistent with what our code says now about street yards.
Yeah.
And then my other suggestion was rather than stairs, which makes sense, our code says steps and stoop. So I would, I guess, substitute steps and stoop for stairs. And that would include the stoop then too, so the landing, the last step. Shouldn't go into that 12-foot setback, in my opinion.
I think those are good clarifications.
Yeah.
and Help make things consistent.
That's helpful, thank you.
And I'll just add my kudos for synthesizing what was sort of a sprawling discussion into a text amendment that makes sense. That was quite an accomplishment, I think. And I think it very well reflects the discussion that we had. Any other thoughts? Are we all right with this going to the board? Okay,
Okay,
All
great,
right.
thank you.
wonderful. Any information anyone has to share?
Could I just make a plug for the special meeting that we're having on September 15th?
Yes.
And I think I've heard back from everyone, I believe, but off the top of my head, I can't remember. But we are having a special meeting. If you could attend Friday, September 15th at 7 PM. And that will be to consider a case that was previously considered by the Planning and Zoning Commission, a variation at 2710 South Harlem. It's a lot that's owned by the village currently and is proposed to be purchased by the owner of 2720, which is the strip mall next door, and parking lot put on there. So we're just making hopefully a minor adjustment to the site plan, but it does require a variation. So we have a quorum, but it's always good to have more people involved if possible. So if you can attend, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
And that piece of property has not yet been transferred from the village?
That's
to-
correct. It's still owned by the village. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll have our special meeting on September 15th. The next regular meeting will be on Wednesday, September 27th. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.